There is a moment when presence becomes too easy, when your time becomes cheap, when your attention becomes a currency handed out without calculation, and in that moment, something ancient shifts. Respect drains, value thins, mystery dies. Not because the world is cruel, but because the human mind is predictable. What is abundant is ignored. What is constant is taken. What is always available is quietly dismissed. People don't admit this truth, but they behave by it. Every day, every hour, in silence. Value lives in controlled distance, not in constant proximity. And this is where Machiavelli draws his line. Power breathes in space. Authority grows in absence. Mystery survives in shadows. Distance is not avoidance. Distance is design. Distance is not coldness. Distance is calibration. Distance is not cruelty. Distance is control. This is Machiavelli's law of controlled distance. And once you understand it, the way people respond to you will never look the same again. Power begins with what remains out of reach. The principle behind controlled distance deserves more than a definition. It needs to be felt slowly, like a truth that sinks into the bones. Familiarity drains power. Scarcity creates value. Controlled absence builds authority. These sentences sound simple, but their implications touch every corner of human behavior. People don't respect what they constantly see. They get used to it. They assume it will always be available. They start taking without noticing they're taking. This is why the sunrise is ignored by those who wake in front of it every day, yet adored by those who see it only once in a while. Human nature works the same way with people. When you are always present, always reachable, always saying yes, your presence stops feeling like a choice. It becomes an expectation, and anything expected loses its weight. Machiavelli saw this dynamic in courts filled with advisors, servants, and nobles. The ruler who spent too much time among the people became ordinary. His silence lost its tension. His image lost its edge. His authority softened, not because he changed, but because his presence no longer felt rare. The more familiar something becomes, the less your mind believes it holds power. Now imagine the opposite. A ruler who appears only when necessary, who speaks only when it matters, who makes himself visible at chosen moments. His absence creates anticipation. His presence creates impact. His silence becomes a message instead of a void. Machiavelli understood that power isn't only in what you do. It's in how often you allow yourself to do it. Controlled distance isn't coldness, it's strategy. It shapes perception before shaping behavior. When someone sees you less often, their mind begins to project value onto you. They imagine who you are in the spaces you do not fill. They notice the moments you return. They pay attention to what you say. They weigh your actions more heavily. Because what is rare is processed with more care. Controlled distance also destroys entitlement. People can't treat you casually when they don't have constant access to you. They can't map out your patterns, your emotions, your habits. They can't predict your every move. And unpredictability creates caution. Caution becomes respect. Respect becomes power. But this distance must be deliberate. Distance born from insecurity feels defensive. People sense when you're pulling away out of fear. That kind of absence weakens your image instead of sharpening it. Controlled distance is the opposite. It is the quiet confidence of someone who knows the value of their time and doesn't throw it at every request. It is the stillness of someone who doesn't rush to reply, not because they are playing games, but because they don't live at the mercy of other people's demands. Imagine a person who appears only when he chooses, not when he's summoned. Imagine a person who speaks when his words have force, not when silence would serve him better. This is what Machiavelli meant when he warned rulers never to make themselves too familiar. He wasn't teaching arrogance. He was teaching protection. Availability can be exploited. Mystery cannot. When you are near enough to be respected, you are human enough to connect. But when you are far enough to be untouchable, you are powerful enough to command. The distance between these two positions is razor thin. But mastering that line is what separates influence from insignificance. Familiarity blurs your edges. Distance sharpens them. Familiarity makes people forget what you offer. Distance forces them to reconsider. Familiarity makes them assume they've seen all of you. Distance makes them wonder what they've missed. People do not chase clarity. They chase what remains slightly out of reach. What is selectively available becomes desirable. What is constantly available becomes ordinary. And that is the paradox at the heart of controlled distance. The less people can consume your presence, the more they hunger for it. The less you offer without thought, the more everything you do offer becomes meaningful. Controlled distance is not an act of withdrawal. It is an act of elevation. It is not about hiding. It is about positioning. It is not about disappearing. It is about returning with weight. When your presence feels intentional, people treat it as something valuable. And when people believe your presence has value, respect follows naturally. This law is not abstract. It operates in friendships, in love, in leadership, in business, in negotiation, in every dynamic where human perception determines power. If you are too close for too long, you dissolve into the background of someone else's life. But when you step back with purpose, the world leans forward to find you, near enough to be respected, far enough to be untouchable, near enough to be known, far enough to be feared. Remember this principle. What is selectively available becomes powerful. What is constantly available becomes invisible. Controlled distance is not a trick. It is a psychological architecture, a fortress built in 4 layers: perception, availability, tension, and power. Each layer shapes how people feel in your presence, how they respond to your absence, and how they calculate your value long before they speak a word. Human beings are not rational creatures. They are creatures of pattern. They react to what pulls away more intensely than they react to what stays close. They crave what they cannot predict. They respect what they cannot fully touch. The first layer is perception. This is the realm where impressions are forged before thoughts even form. People judge distance instinctively: how close you stand, how often you reply, how quickly you respond, how freely you give your presence. Too much closeness becomes noise. Too much availability becomes white static. The mind adapts, normalizes, and then discounts what it sees too often. Mystery evaporates when presence becomes routine. Respect erodes when access becomes unlimited. But controlled distance interrupts that normalization. It disrupts the psychological autopilot people run on. When you pull back at the right moment, their mind awakens. They start observing you more closely, thinking more deeply, wondering more intensely. Distance forces the mind to pay attention. The second layer is availability. This is not about ignoring people or creating artificial scarcity. It is about managing where your attention goes. When your time is scarce, your presence becomes precious. When your availability is selective, people rethink how they interact with you. They speak differently, they approach differently, they measure their words. They respect your boundaries without you stating a single rule. Machiavelli understood this when he wrote that a prince must rarely grant full access, because frequent presence lowers reverence. You cannot command authority when you are always standing in the middle of the crowd, answering every call, reacting to every impulse. Authority is built in the space you do not fill. The third layer is tension. Controlled distance introduces psychological tension into the dynamic, not conflict, but anticipation. People value what creates anticipation. They devalue what is predictable. When others do not know when you will respond, when you will appear, when you will decide, they become more alert. They watch the small signals. They notice your shifts. They read deeper into your words. This tension is not manipulation, it is control of rhythm. The weaker man lives in reaction. The stronger man controls the timing. The weaker man responds instantly to every message, every demand, every request. The stronger man lets the moment breathe. He understands what Sun Tzu meant when he said, "The one who controls pace controls outcome." Distance slows the game. Tension turns the psychological field in your favor. The fourth layer is power. This is where controlled distance becomes something deeper than strategy. It becomes presence. When people feel they cannot easily access you, they instinctively assume you have inner resources they cannot see. They project strength onto you. They imagine depth. They sense that your time is guarded because your mission is larger than their demands. Power is rarely about what you show. It is about what others assume is behind the veil. Distance makes the veil visible. Distance makes people imagine the world you are busy conquering. Distance hints at authority without displaying it. In every domain, business, relationships, friendships, social dynamics, the person who manages their distance is perceived as the one who leads. Consider the modern world. The man who replies instantly is seen as idle. The man who replies deliberately is seen as focused. The man who is always present is overlooked. The man who is selectively present is noticed. Presence loses power when it is constant. Distance gives presence its edge. Think of the leaders people follow. Think of the individuals whose arrival shifts the atmosphere. They are not constantly available. They move with intention. They protect their time. Their boundaries are felt rather than spoken. People adjust around them. People wait for their approval. People chase their attention because it is not given lightly. Controlled distance also reveals truth about others. When you create space, you see who becomes anxious, who becomes angry, who becomes respectful, and who becomes curious. Distance exposes insecurity. Distance exposes entitlement. Distance exposes hidden motives. A man who cannot tolerate your controlled absence is a man who wanted to control your presence. This is why distance is not just power, it is clarity. It cleans the field. It shows you who stands with you, who stands against you, and who stands only when you are near. Machiavelli warned that those who demand your constant proximity do so not out of loyalty, but out of dependency. Distance filters them out. In relationships, controlled distance resets dynamics that have drifted into imbalance. When someone thinks they have you secured, they stop investing, they stop observing, they stop valuing. Familiarity makes them careless. Distance wakes them. It returns weight to your presence. It reminds them that your attention has a cost. The man who is too available becomes forgettable. The man who is selectively available becomes unforgettable. In social circles, controlled distance shifts you from participant to presence. People speak differently about the man who moves with deliberate absence. They create stories, they fill the gaps with assumptions. They speculate about what he is doing, who he is with, what he is planning. Their imagination becomes an amplifier of your aura. When distance enters the room before you do, people rise to their feet. In business, controlled distance separates leaders from followers. The employee who is always present, always around, always accessible, is seen as replaceable. The leader, who appears only when necessary, commands more attention in 5 minutes than others do in 5 hours. His silence feels intentional. His presence feels decisive. His distance signals focus, discipline, and higher purpose. A man who guards his time is a man who can shape outcomes. Yet controlled distance is not cold withdrawal. It is not emotional detachment. It is not disappearing completely. Complete absence is weakness disguised as strategy. Controlled distance means stepping back without severing. It means choosing presence with precision. It means showing yourself just enough to maintain influence, but not enough to lose mystique. It is a balance few master. The weak retreat out of fear. The strong retreat out of power. Distance is not the absence of connection. It is the architecture of respect. It is the space that allows desire to grow, curiosity to rise, and perception to sharpen. Without distance, there is no value. Without boundaries, there is no respect. Without scarcity, there is no worth. Controlled distance creates all three. At its core, this law is not about hiding. It is about revealing slowly, not making yourself scarce, but making yourself significant, not reducing availability, but elevating it. People do not respect what is always in front of them. People do not desire what they can predict. People do not fear what they fully understand. And people do not follow what feels common. Controlled distance is the art of becoming uncommon. It is the discipline to step back when the world pulls you in. It is the strength to withhold when others demand. It is the intelligence to let absence speak louder than presence. And, above all, it is the mastery of perception, the silent realm, where power is born long before actions begin. Controlled distance is not a mood, not a tactic, and not a momentary stance. It is a discipline, a way of moving through the world with purpose instead of impulse. It is the quiet architecture of authority. To use it effectively, the rules must be understood not as suggestions, but as structural laws. Laws that shape how others perceive you, respond to you, and position themselves around you. These laws create the atmosphere through which your presence travels. They determine whether you enter as a leader or as a follower, as a force or as an afterthought. What follows are the pillars of this discipline, the moves that transform distance from simple absence into psychological leverage. Rule 1. Control your availability with intent. The world has conditioned most men into believing that constant accessibility is a virtue. They answer instantly, show up without thought, give attention without pause. But constant presence signals dependency, not strength. Controlled availability means your presence must arrive with purpose, not habit. When your time is guarded, people instinctively treat it as valuable. When you choose your moments, your presence becomes an event. The man who is always available becomes invisible. The man who chooses when to appear becomes unforgettable. Rule 2. Speak with precision, then withdraw. Conversation is the easiest place to lose authority. People talk too much, reveal too much, and compensate for insecurity by filling silence. Controlled distance begins with controlled speech. Say only what carries weight, then let the silence after your words create tension. The silence is the blade. Your words are the handle. Together, they form a weapon. A man who speaks briefly but with clarity creates an atmosphere others lean into. They start measuring their own words. They expose more of themselves while you expose less. Controlled distance works because your withdrawal from unnecessary talk gives more meaning to the moments you choose to speak. Rule 3. Let others initiate more than you do. Power is revealed by the direction of effort. When you initiate constantly texts, calls, plans, favors, attention, you frame yourself as the seeker. When others initiate, they frame you as the prize. People chase what is slightly out of reach, not what is endlessly offered. Controlled distance means giving others the space to step toward you. Their actions reveal their desire, their respect, and their intentions. The man who takes a step back sees clearly who is willing to step forward. Observation becomes clarity. Initiative becomes leverage. Rule 4. Maintain emotional neutrality under pressure. The moment others can provoke you, they understand your wiring. They know where the cracks are. When your reactions remain calm, steady, and measured, your distance becomes psychological armor. It signals that your emotions are not accessible. It shows that your equilibrium cannot be stolen. The world respects the man who does not flinch. Controlled distance does not merely concern where you stand. It concerns the state you hold while standing there. A controlled exterior reflects an untouchable interior. Rule 5. Never reward intrusion with instant attention. Intrusion is the act of others demanding immediate access to your mind, time, or energy. The weaker man jumps to respond, desperate to avoid displeasure or conflict. Controlled distance rejects this reflex. When someone pushes into your space abruptly, let the moment settle. Give it breath. Respond when the rhythm belongs to you, not when pressure dictates. This is not avoidance, it is authority. You are teaching the world the pace at which you operate. You are showing that your attention is not governed by urgency, but by judgment. Rule 6. Reveal intentions slowly and strategically. People lose power when they expose their plans too quickly. Excessive transparency invites interference, dilution, and manipulation. Controlled distance means allowing your purpose to unfold gradually. You show results, not blueprints. You show movement, not the map. When others cannot track your entire trajectory, they cannot disrupt it. Mystery is not deception. It is a boundary. The less predictable you are, the more strategically you move. The more strategically you move, the harder you are to counter. Rule 7. Build a life that justifies your distance. Controlled distance is not about pretending to be valuable. It is about becoming valuable. When your purpose is clear, your mission active, your focus sharpened, your distance becomes natural, not forced. People respect the man whose absence is filled with creation, discipline, and ambition. They respect the man whose world does not revolve around validation. Distance supported by substance becomes dominance. Distance without substance becomes avoidance. You earn the right to distance by building something worth protecting. These rules are not abstract ideas. They form the spine of psychological leverage. When practiced consistently, they reshape how others approach you, how they interpret your silence, how they feel when you speak, and how they navigate around your presence. Controlled distance is not about leaving people behind. It is about elevating yourself beyond their reach. It is the slow forging of an aura, the subtle, unmistakable impression that your time has weight, your attention has cost, and your presence has consequence. A man who lives by these laws becomes an axis, the point others revolve around. His distance creates demand. His presence creates gravity. His silence creates anticipation. And his boundaries create respect. Distance, when mastered, is not separation. It is command. Controlled distance is not something you learn in a single moment of clarity. It is forged slowly, across the quiet hours when no one is watching. It grows through restraint, through the refusal to be pulled by every voice, through the discipline to remain centered when the noise around you demands reaction. It is built in the pauses you choose, the boundaries you enforce, and the silences you allow to breathe. Most men do not master it because most men cannot tolerate the weight of their own presence. They rush to fill space. They chase approval. They fear stillness because stillness reveals who they are. But the man who embraces distance discovers an entirely different form of power. He becomes anchored. He becomes clear. He becomes deliberate. The world does not toss him from emotion to emotion, opinion to opinion, demand to demand. He stands in the middle of the storm without bending to its winds. His absence carries weight because his presence carries intention. Every step he takes means something. Every word he speaks shapes the atmosphere. Every moment he withholds becomes part of his influence. People feel the difference. They sense that you are not rushing to be chosen. They sense that your attention is not up for negotiation. They sense that your presence is not a commodity thrown into every passing moment. Distance sharpens your outline. It gives your presence definition. It separates you from the masses who live with their time exposed, their emotions unguarded, their boundaries undefined. When you master distance, you do not need to demand respect. The air around you demands it for you. Controlled distance changes not only how the world sees you, it changes how you see the world. You begin to notice who earns access and who merely expects it. You recognize which connections strengthen you and which ones drain you. You see intentions more clearly because you are not smothered by them. You move from reacting to observing, from responding to deciding, from chasing to choosing. And slowly, without announcing it, you become the axis in your own life rather than a satellite in someone else's. A man who understands controlled distance understands himself. He knows what he values. He knows what he refuses. He builds a world that reflects that clarity. In that world, respect comes naturally because respect is embedded in the structure of how he moves. His boundaries are not walls of hostility but gates of discernment. His silence is not emptiness but authority. His presence is not loud but irrefutable. This is the kind of man Machiavelli wrote about, a man who does not expose himself too freely, who governs his space, who shapes perception through deliberate absence and chosen presence. Cold confidence begins with distance. Quiet authority grows from it. Psychological leverage emerges from it. And respect anchors itself to it. A man who is always available becomes a man no one values. A man who controls his distance becomes a man no one forgets. Carry this law with you. Power doesn't come from being everywhere. Power comes from being missed.